Hey everybody, welcome back to the My Game Dev podcast. And it's been a while, so it was time really to record a new episode. So yeah, I've been very busy, and that is part of the reason why I haven't recorded. So, but I try to catch up now and really get going. So what was on my mind, and there's obviously a reason for that why this is on my mind, but I asked myself, like, what is an indie game studio? And probably many of you wonder, especially who just want to start, right? And want to get started with video game development. It's kind of a popular phrase to say, oh, we need an indie game studio, or we are indie game dev. So I think indie game dev kind of means that you're not working for a company that pays you to make a video game, I think. Or it's either a small team, maybe just a handful of people, and things like that, right? So this is not like super well defined, but when I say indie game studio, it kind of means that probably you're not like professionally trained, maybe you're self-taught and you're just starting out, and probably no one would really hire you just to get started, or you do not really have the intent to get started. Maybe you started as a side hustle and you just do it besides a day job, right? Like I do. Oh, and obviously I'm not talking about those guys who are leaving big and established game making companies. So yeah, I know that is also a type of indie game studio, right? When veterans and very experienced people basically leave a big company and start their own. But that's really not what we are talking about, because that's just not who I am. But I was still thinking, like, what is the moment when you can think or say that, hey, I have an indie game studio, or what that is? I try to kind of atomize it, like disassemble this thought and this concept of an indie game studio. I think it's actually very simple. That I think probably this is just something that technically or practically is in your head. It's just in your head, right? People tend to say when you start, for example, learning an instrument, it's good, for example, is if you are planning to play the guitar and you buy a guitar, and when you get started, it's actually a good idea to think of yourself as a guitarist, like as a guitar player. Like, don't say that, oh, I'm just a hobbyist, I'm just trying. No, think about yourself as a guitar player, even though you are at the very, very beginning of your journey. And I thought was a pretty good advice. And obviously the imposter syndrome comes with it. So I'm not saying it's like easy to kind of call yourself a guitar player while you know that maybe the only thing you could do is just like strum the strings without actually knowing a single chord or whatever, right? So obviously that's kind of a weird situation to start out, but we all have this kind of uncomfortable feeling when we want to embark on something, and we know we are really not trained, or we don't really have enough skill and knowledge and experience to really call ourselves a guitar player. So this is the analogy that I just want to use, that I believe an indie game studio is kind of similar when you start it, or especially when this is the very beginning of it. So I think now, and basically it's an announcement, surprise, I think now I have an indie game studio. So what it is, I try to explain it. Up until now, the indie game studio that I had, because I was just solo, right? I was doing it on my own, and it was just basically playing around with ideas and daydreaming, and sometimes actually having an inspiration and taking action and kind of trying to draw video game characters and try to basically slice up, the characters, try to animate them, rig them a little bit using Unity and whatnot. So it was really just long years of experimentation, but and a lot of unfinished projects. It's just like a new project once in a while, and then taking it to a certain level and then just abandoning it. Like, seriously, that's what it was really. Other game developers, especially indie game devs, especially like YouTube creators, they seem much more organized and much more professional than I am. Or maybe, when they produce content about it, they just try to show their best stuff. But for me, it's absolutely not like that. It's just a collection of ideas and many abandoned things. And yeah, I often get excited, or I often got excited about one thing, so I kind of worked on it for a couple of days or a couple of iterations, not just days, but maybe a couple of weeks, not every day, of course, and then slowly abandoning it, or like, finding another thing to do. But it was just, I think it was still fun, because I realized that I really enjoy the process of of drawing, right? And making characters come to life to a certain degree. And yeah, I just really like that. And I also realized that I'm so much better probably at character design than in background design. I'm really struggling now with background design, but I'm getting there. But if I just have an idea, probably it's more around characters, and I'm more naturally sitting down and starting to draw characters than backgrounds and props. Oh, and just in case you're interested, you could look at the description of this podcast episode and go to the link in there, and you can learn just more about us. You can see our past itch.io games and also some of the concept art I made up until now. They're not great, but they exist, and I'm quite happy about them. Back to the talk track. So what is an indie game dev studio? Knowing this kind of hectic background, and especially if this is not your primary, source of income or primary job, whatever, then it's very difficult to call yourself an indie game dev, right? Because it doesn't really feel like that at all, right? It just feels like a hobby and you just do it. But the more you do, probably after a couple of years, you should start asking yourself, like, what is this that you are doing all the time in your free time, like I do, right? Because I always realize, just concepting a game. Oh, here's a new game idea. Oh, here's another drawing. Here's another character design. Oh, here's another environment design, whatever, right? So I think there's a moment where you basically, if you are serious about this to a certain degree, you want to kind of arrange the thoughts in your head, right? In your mind that, okay, now probably this is an indie game something, right? It's almost like a studio, maybe not yet, but it's almost like a studio. So let's see what that is. So like from an equipment point of view, my small experimental indie game dev studio was really just an iPad with an Apple Pencil. Like that's it. And I purchased Procreate, which is a super cheap but very awesome software to do illustrations or whatever. And I just really got into it. So I used it a lot. But basically that's it, right? Like no Unity at this stage, no expensive PC or computer or whatever. It's just an iPad with an Apple Pencil. It was actually the budget iPad at the very beginning. So I think I bought it. I always had iPads, but when I bought one that was compatible with the first Apple Pencil, I think it was back in 2018. So already 6 years ago. And that's when I started. I was still drawing just comics that time around, so I wasn't really that serious about video games. I knew that I would like to get there, but I was just drawing comics to entertain my friends and myself. And I think it was in like a year later or 2 years later, roughly, when I really started to focus on video game content, video game art. So, but that was it really. 4 years ago, I upgraded to an iPad Pro and an Apple Pencil 2 that time around, which was awesome because it's very, very fun to actually draw on that device. It was kind of expensive, to be honest. I already told you guys that it's quite expensive to buy these things on this side of the planet. It's in Hungary, Budapest, so where I am. So yeah, but it was totally worth the investment, and I'm still using that. I'm gonna get there, but basically my indie game dev studio from a practical and technical point of view was just an iPad Pro with an Apple Pencil with Procreate on it, and that's it, right? I don't need anything else. I also want to say it because I want to kind of demystify, right? That you don't really need more to build like a portfolio or start concepting, especially if you're an artist. I know probably I'm not speaking to the coders here, right? I'm more like art first type of guy. And I like to really visualize first some of the ideas. Even if it's just low fidelity, I prefer to get into it from an artistic point of view. And that's also, obviously that has some disadvantages because I'm not that great at gameplay, I think, to be honest. So I'm always leaning towards genres that are more story-oriented and art-oriented, like Night in the Woods or Jenny LeClue. Or I really love the other indie game called Rain Swept. Yeah, so there's quite a lot. Now I'm playing Eastward. That's awesome too. So my indie game dev studio, when I was just a solo guy, was just basically an iPad Pro, an Apple Pencil, and Procreate. And the rest of the investment went into probably some brushes, textures. The typical stuff I think that any newcomer is doing is that I kind of thought that if I buy fancy brushes, then without any training, I'm just gonna get better, right? But that's actually not the case. I learned it the hard way that actually probably even the default brushes are pretty good in Procreate. So I think I expected too much from fancy brushes and brush packs. Obviously, those websites that are selling them, they are always coupling with awesome illustrations, whatnot. So it kind of makes you feel, oh my God, I just need to buy this fucking brush pack and I'm gonna just immediately start making this beautiful art. It's totally not the case. So I learned it the hard way. So yeah, some money was wasted on those brush packs, but I'm pretty much sticking to just a set of brushes that I like to use, and that's it. I don't really overthink it anymore like I did back in the day. I have just a bunch of textures and whatnot. Maybe I should learn more about textures, but right now I'm happy with a couple of, paper textures and whatever, things like that, right? So I'm not overthinking that either. Okay, so that was it for a while. And then I think it was roughly 3 years ago when I decided that besides my work computer, it's time to buy a personal computer as well, because I really didn't want to store my illustrations and just Procreate files saved on my computer, on my work computer. So I have also a Mac Mini. Yeah, I just bought a Mac Mini because I have a screen, I have a keyboard, and I thought it's perfectly enough for me. It's the it was the Intel back in the day since I upgraded, but I have a Mac Mini, that's all you need to know. It's pretty good. I actually love it. Now so this M2 thing is pretty fast and it runs Photoshop well. It also runs Unity pretty well. So that's perfectly enough for me because I'm doing 2D. Maybe it's gonna crash eventually, I don't know, but I think for now it served me pretty well. And I can record like this podcast on it, so it's pretty good, right? In case you wanna start doing it, probably you don't need a Mac Mini. I like Mac, and since I draw on the Procreate on the or with Procreate on the iPad, I just like the Apple ecosystem. But I heard that eventually, maybe when I get even more serious in our projects, files are going to blow up and they're going to be so big. Maybe I would need like a decent PC because it's very, very expensive to upgrade or buy like a super powerful Mac. So yeah, but that's where I am right now. Right now it serves me pretty well. And that's it, right? Let me list it out where I am right now. So my indie game dev studio is an iPad Pro with an Apple Pencil. I have Procreate on it. I have now a Mac Mini that helps me to create content, and obviously it helps me to use Photoshop. So I also have a Photoshop subscription. It's just the base one. It's not, the big full subscription. It's just the one with the Photoshop, and that's it. I don't even have Illustrator. I'm not using Vector. I don't even like Vector art too much. I mean, I like it when somebody else is doing it, but I'm not really great at it right now. I'm not focusing on it. So that's what I have. So the other software that I use, and I know I totally misuse this software, right? I'm not doing it right, but I still think it's good. It's called Figma. It's actually for user interface design, and UX designers really use this tool a lot. It helps you to prototype user interfaces, whatnot. But I just love the simplicity of it over Adobe stuff. So over Adobe Photoshop, for example. So if I really, really quickly want to brainstorm about something and just mock something up with like a couple of boxes, or even just put my art assets or characters into a super low fidelity scenery or scene, I use Figma. And I know Figma is absolutely not for game design. I get it, or I'm not sure who else. I would love to meet somebody else who is using Figma for that. And also what I like, especially when I prototype like a point and click game, then I could very, very fast, without adding game engine, I can just mock it up, like otherwise this would be used for applications, websites, right? Where you could create like a clickable, actionable mockup. Obviously, it's so limited, so don't assume that you can just build a full-blown game. But to illustrate the concept, have like a user interface pretty quickly built, have your assets in it. I love it. I totally misuse it, but Figma is something, and it's the free tier. I'm not paying a single penny for it, so I just use it. So that's also part of my so-called indie game studio. And obviously I need internet. And on the Mac Mini, so on one thing about the Mac, right, that people have the tendency to say, oh, but the Mac is expensive, blah, blah, blah. Yeah, might be, but it's very reliable. And also I like the fact that I don't have to pay for the operating system. It's actually a quite important thing. So, and most of the native functions of the Mac just work pretty well for me. I use GarageBand to record audio, for simple videos, the iMovie is good enough. Obviously, there's other free options. I know DaVinci Resolve, whatnot, but I'm not really using those too often, right? So I wouldn't even say that those are necessary for indie game dev right now. I think eventually it's gonna be, especially when I start to create more content about the game, like video content. We want to also start a devlog or whatever, right? But the whole idea is that right now it's fairly simple and you can keep it super simple and you don't have to buy many things at all. Okay, I think what's important is that also I invested into courses. So I know it's not. So when I go to Reddit, I always see Thomas Brush being kind of bashed and just say that, oh, he's not a real game dev. But I think his courses are pretty good. Actually, I'm one of those guys who like them. And yeah, for me, who is totally coming from the outside, I really like the way he explains things. So, and I'm not speaking about his YouTube persona, right? But I think his courses are pretty good and really help you to get started. So obviously I invested into some of the courses. I also bought courses from Udemy, I think back in the day, but I just found them so boring. I'm gonna be coming back to those later on because I want to dedicate a special episode to that one. All right, so that's it, guys. That was my indie game dev studio for a while. So it exists in my head, right? It's not a thing. It's just something that I imagine that I have, and that's it. And probably that's it, right? You don't have to overthink that. And after a while, I started to post my work on Instagram. Actually, I think after the very first indie game dev related artwork that I posted on my Instagram, on my personal Instagram, I just used a couple of hashtags, whatnot. Right after, a friend of mine who I didn't really speak to in a while just reached out to me that, hey man, I'm also thinking about this game dev thing for a while, and actually I'm using Unity and I already have some itch.io stuff out there. I was like, wow. So we met last year, more than a year ago, the beginning of 2023, and we decided that we will do something together. So that resulted in a couple of abandoned projects, which I'm going to be talking about in another podcast because I think it's super interesting to talk about these abandoned projects and why we abandoned them and whatnot. But that's when, and now we are more than a year later. And the reason why I was so busy is because we have created a real place for this studio. We call it Monoblock Studio. It's Monoblock written with a K. Maybe one time I will tell you why I call it that way, but it's called Monoblock Studio. Now it exists. It's still in our head. It's not a business entity, but there's actually a place, a room in the city where there's 2 workstations, right? We invested into it. So there's 2 workstations, which means 2 desks and 2 chairs. And I also invested into PC. So there is now a PC because my partner does not have a board, like a laptop or anything like that, right? So we needed a workstation there and also a PC. And I'm just using my iPad Pro. I'm using my Mac Mini. Sometimes my work laptop, but just if it's really needed. But that's it. We need obviously internet, and we use Unity. So my partner is using Unity, and we purchased a couple of assets. Obviously, he's doing it a couple of times, but for this particular project that we are working on, which is a 2D strategy game, it's not fully refined yet or defined yet, but we will make it. I think, soon it's going to be pretty clear what this game wants to be and what we want it to be. But anyways, the most important thing is that for that we purchased a couple of assets. I think the most important one was the Pathfinder. Well, it's not an asset. It's from the asset store. Basically, it's a plugin. It's something that, so we don't have to code the way our workers and our players need to, find the place where they need to go. So yeah, those small things, right? But in a nutshell, now basically our indie game studio is a place in the city. It's like a 12 square meters room somewhere, which I'm very fortunate that I can use because it's a family thing, and I have the opportunity to actually have a room somewhere where we can go, and it's almost fully dedicated to this indie game dev studio, which is called Monoblock Studios, which is not yet a business entity, but please don't steal the name. We'd like to use it. And yeah, it's basically an iPad Pro with an Apple Pencil with Procreate on it. I have a Mac Mini with a Photoshop. I use Figma, which is free. I pay for the internet. We have a PC. We have 2 workstations, which means 2 desks and 2 chairs, and that's it. And obviously, we have some cables and stuff like that, but that's it. Like, that's the Indie Game Dev Studio. Nothing else right now. It's 2 of us. We are duo deving. It's not a solo dev, it's duo dev, which I think it's much more efficient than just solo deving. I'm responsible for the art. My partner is responsible for the gameplay. The way we define it is that I am major in art, minor in gameplay, and he's major in gameplay and minor in art, right? So we let each other kind of dictate or define what's next in our domains, right? So on the art field, I kind of show the way. On the gameplay front, he's showing the way. But we obviously exchange. We cannot meet too many times, right? So we try to meet at least once a week, but actually it has been really helpful because the other big learning, and that's why we decided to actually have this physical studio, is because we realized that first of all, we are not that far from each other, so why not? And in person, making games is just much more fun, much more efficient. We can have lunch together. We could just talk about whatever, right? During when we are working together, it's not just limited to the game dev, which we really enjoy, by the way. It's super good. I'm going to talk about some of the things that we have done in another episode, but yeah, so that's it. That's an indie game dev studio. Very, very simple. I think it requires some investment if you don't have the equipment, but I don't believe it has to cost a fortune. And it's very effective if one of the members is good at gameplay and has some experience with Unity or whatever, Godot, whichever you like or prefer. We use Unity because that's just what we have experience with. And I'm using Procreate on the iPad. That's it. This is not a promoted thing, but I just kind of wanted to let you know that it's that simple. Nothing special about it. But the good thing is now we have a studio, which was super awesome to build. And I really felt some true satisfaction, when I saw it. Wow, now we have 12 square meters of game dev studio. Like, it's a workshop, it's a small lair, right, where we make games. Not too often, because obviously we have our lives and our duties, but like meeting at least once a week, super awesome. Sometimes it's hard to actually squeeze it in, so it's not really that as good as it could be. But I really do hope that eventually we get there. So yeah, guys, that's an indie game studio, at least in my opinion. Probably others have much more professional studios and, they are much more skilled, but that's how we started from. And I think this is one of the reasons why I have this podcast, to kind of talk about the genesis, like the very, very first steps, because most of the other creators and game devs who work on games, they start a document or they kind of retrospectively talk about it. Yeah, I just started out, but you're not following through step by step what they went through, right? They just kind of look back and say like a couple of years ago I had this and that, but that time around they may not document their stuff and things like that. So I think now it's good that I could this is still fresh. This is still a fresh experience, and it's obviously still insecure, but it really helps to see it come to life. And like this monoblock thing, we have a logo now. That's what we use as a background on the PC, in the studio, which is awesome. Like these small things that help us to make it feel real, that it's a real thing. It's no longer just in our heads. Obviously, I know probably it could be just as simple as I started, right? That you are totally doing this on your own. But I think it's much more fun doing it together if you're fortunate enough to have somebody to work with. I am luckily fortunate enough to have somebody to work with, and I wish you guys the same. So that's that. That's all I wanted to share this time. It's a pretty positive period in terms of game dev, and we get stuck sometimes with our game, but we are not giving up. That's what matters. So we keep doing it. It's getting nicer. It's getting clear, but we are not there yet. But I hope we're going to get there. And hopefully, I hope this year it's going to be something that many of you can play. Thank you very much for listening. I really, really appreciate it. and talk to you guys next time.